doing a little recording about considering horizontal and vertical application slices and what that actually means. This came out of a conversation with a lad on Discord who was talking about his Python application and worrying that he was probably going to have to rewrite his application in order to make the user interface work. So I just wanted to explain what it means to think about the horizontals and the verticals in your application to help him understand whether his application is going to be okay or not for him to put that user interface on top, and something to learn for the next time he builds an application. So, one of the things that you find when you start building applications to start with is that you will be given a task or be asked to do something. And what you'll do is you'll write a little bit of code, and it'll have some inputs and it'll create some outputs. That's great, works, no problem. Thing is, the next thing you'll be asked to do is write something else that's related to that, and what you'll do is you'll write a bit of functionality for that, and that bit of functionality will also have some outputs. What you'll find you do though is you end up putting an input that comes through your original bit of code. That now means that that piece of code is reliant on your original piece of code in order for it to work. It gets worse though, because what will happen is in this bit of code you'll actually write a good, nice, reusable little bit of code, and you'll think, great, new bit of application, I'll reuse that bit of code in this new piece of code. So you'll write this new piece of code, and actually you'll have some inputs that go straight into that bit of code. Great. But you're reusing a bit of code there, and it's doing some outputs. So now what you've got is three individual pieces of code that are all reliant on one another. This middle piece is reliant on the outer piece in order to be able to get its inputs, and this piece here is reliant on the reusable piece of code that's inside of that component there. And that's going to make your life quite difficult. It's going to make it difficult for you to update any of this or change any of the code and be unsure as to whether actually you're going to be breaking anything else in your application, particularly if you haven't got to the point of doing test-driven development where you'll write a test for a piece of code and then write the code to go with the test. So what you want to do is you need to think about the separation on this. We've kind of talked about it a little bit in the sense that we've talked about inputs. So the first bit of this that you're going to think about is your presentation layer. So your presentation layer is also called your user interface. Okay, so it's the way that it'll do inputs, take inputs, and also provide outputs. Now, most of what you've probably written in here is what we call the business logic. It's the bit that takes your input, understands what's happening with it, changes it, and does perform some logic on it, and then does your output. Now, that's called your application layer. and that contains all your business logic. Okay. The last bit of this, every application these days has some kind of data. That could be coming from another website, it could be coming from a file, but more than likely it's going to be coming from a database. And this is your data access layer. Your data access layer provides you with a way of accessing your data, writing to it, reading from it, or holding on to that data, persisting that data for your application whilst you're using it. And that is predominantly going to be talking to your database. So your presentation layer will talk to your application layer. Your application layer will talk to the data access layer. Data access layer will talk to your database. Database will tell the data access layer information. Your data access layer will tell the application layer that data. And the application layer, once it's changed that data to the way that the business logic expects it to look like, will give it to your presentation layer. Now, we kind of talked about this a little bit before. Each of these little circles on here is a different piece of functionality. Each of these is going to have a little bit of this in it. So they'll have a bit of presentation, somewhere to get the inputs, some way to put the outputs. You'll have a bit of logic in there, a way to work out how to do things, and then finally a way to store or do something with some data. It might be that actually you're just using constants or a file, but as you build your applications, it's going to be a database or another data source. So, thinking about these three things, but also thinking about them in the context of the presentation layer. So we've got presentation layer, got our application layer, and our data access layer. Now, each one of these is a component, a separate piece of functionality. You'll probably hear of things called separation of concerns. So there's two lots of separations of concerns going on here. There's the functional separation, but also the separation into presentation, application, and data access. So when you build these functional areas, you need to think about them in these layers as well. So this first component, you'll want to think about, what is it presenting? What logic does it have? And what data does it need and does it use? Equally, for your second component, you'll want its presentation layer. And you're going to want to separate that from the original component so that it has its own display and inputs, not directly associated with that. And again, it'll have its own business logic, and it will have its own data. Last but not least, we've got a third piece here. Now, I'm going to do something slightly different here. We've got the presentation layer, and it'll have its data, but its application layer may well talk to both of these data access layers. Maybe it's getting a bit of information, a bit of data that was provided in exactly the same way for the other component. So your components will talk down through the layers. Now, when you start talking about applications and application slices and layers and monolithic applications, some of this architecture you will find will create a lot of repetition, a lot of boilerplate code that is very similar across all of these functions and all of these layers. It does become quite unwieldy and can be quite complicated. But for small applications, this is probably a very good way to do this. If you're getting more complicated, then you're going to get into domain models and microservices architectures and things like that. But let's keep it simple for the minute. Now, when we talk about horizontal slices, we've talked about this. You're thinking about a presentation layer, an application layer, and a data access layer. As I've said, if you Google application architecture layers, you're probably going to find references to 5, 6, and 7 different types of application layer. But this is the main way that you're going to, and the first way that you're going to discuss horizontal layers. Now, vertical application slices. These are your vertical application slices. These bits here within your application, where a component talks down through the layers to with a bit of display and input, a bit of logic, and then a bit of data access. And this is what you need to think about when you're starting to deliver software applications. Don't try to do all of the things at once. Think about one thing at a time. What you want to do is create a slice that works all the way through, right from the top to the bottom. Once you've got that working, you can think about the next slice, and then onto the next slice. Now, there may be things that join these slices together in your display layer, your presentation layer at the top, but that'll come later, and don't worry about it. But if you think about your application in these vertical slices, it means that you can deliver, if you start talking about agile delivery, potentially releasable increments. One slice all the way through your application that does one thing. And that is essentially what a vertical application slice is. One set of components that delivers one piece of functionality through each of the presentation, application, and data access layers. I hope that helps. It's very simplistic, and there's a lot more to this when you start looking at other application architectures and ways that you can improve this. But hopefully this simplistic view will give you a start of a 10 to understand how it all fits together and how you can avoid creating spaghetti code that you'll get if you don't think about it in both your horizontal and your vertical slices of your application. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please do click the like button down below. I've only just started creating these, so if you've got any suggestions or recommendations for improvements, please do leave me a comment below. If you have a question that you think I could help you with, there's a link to Discord in the description below. Come and join and come and ask a question, and I'll see what I can do to help. See you next time.